What would you do if your wealth was so immense that the entire world became your playground? Emperor Elagabalus didn't ask himself that question. He simply lived. He organized banquets where the tables were made of solid silver, the dishes decorated with ground pearls, and the food came from the most exotic corners of the empire. An example: flamingo tongues, ostrich brains, and eels, which according to some reports, were fed with the remains of Christian slaves. Exaggerated? Perhaps. But not impossible when power has no limits. In ancient Rome, being rich was not just about having. It was about dominating. It was about deciding who lived, who died, and how you would be remembered. But beyond banquets, palaces, and gold coins, there was something even deeper, a way of life built on luxury, obsession with appearance, and the eternal need to leave a mark. Today, we'll explore how life was at the top of that pyramid. What did they eat? What did they wear? Where did they sleep? How did the most powerful men and women in the most influential empire in history think? And by the end of this video, you'll understand that wealth is not always about gold, but something darker, more addictive, and much more human. To understand what power really was in Rome, we have to talk about Marcus Licinius Crassus. He was not an emperor. He was not Caesar. He was not loved by the people nor remembered for glorious military feats. He was something colder. More calculating. Crassus was the silent architect of absolute economic power. A man who turned destruction into wealth, and tragedy into opportunity. His story begins during the bloody purges of Lucius Cornelius Sulla, a dictator who eliminated his political enemies by confiscating their property. While Rome mourned, Crassus bought. Entire properties were sold at ridiculously low prices due to fear or force. Crassus, with a serene smile and a bag full of coins, acquired them one by one. He knew that every abandoned house was a future treasure. But what was truly brilliant was his business model. Crassus built his fortune on fire. Literally. He organized a brigade of slave firefighters. If your house burned down, he arrived first, not with water, but with an offer, he'd buy it in the middle of the fire. Then, with his own workers, more than 500 enslaved architects and builders, he would rebuild it in record time. Within a few years, he controlled entire blocks of Rome. Not by inheritance, not by war, but by strategy. His fortune was so colossal that the historian Plutarch estimated that he owned more than 7,000 talents of gold. An amount equivalent to the total budget of the empire for an entire year. To put that into perspective, today, that would be like one person controlling the gross domestic product of an entire European nation. But Crassus was not only rich. He was influential. He financed political campaigns, pressured senators, and bought loyalties as easily as one buys bread at the market. He was one of the three pillars of the famous First Triumvirate, alongside Pompey and Julius Caesar. And although his name didn't carry the same weight in the marble of history, his shadow was decisive. What was the price of such ambition? His life ended in one of Rome's most disastrous campaigns, the expedition to Parthia. Some say he died executed. Others say the Parthians made him swallow molten gold as punishment for his greed. Reality or myth, it doesn't matter. What matters is that his story teaches us something eternal, that in times of crisis, some run away, and others buy. And in Rome, the one who bought, ruled. In Rome, you were not rich because of what you had, but because of what you could possess without anyone daring to question it. Wealth was not measured in coins, but in land. In hectares, in marble columns, in mosaics that covered entire halls. Every brick was an assertion, I am above you. The villas of the rich were not houses. They were micro-empires. A Roman aristocrat didn't need to go out for anything. Within his property, he had gardens, private baths, libraries, altars, slaves who attended to every aspect of his life. The vestibules were designed to impress. With high ceilings, indoor fountains, imported Greek sculptures, and frescoes painted by the most sought-after artists of the time. But the most important thing wasn't what was visible, but what was hidden: access to water. The aqueduct systems that brought water to the city were monuments of engineering. But only a few had direct pipes to their homes. A private pool with running water in the 1st century. That detail alone placed you at the top of the hierarchy. In Pompeii, the city frozen in time by the eruption of Mount Vesuvius, archaeologists have found villas of up to 3,000 square meters, with murals depicting family feasts, ceilings decorated with gold, and indoor gardens with underground irrigation systems. Moreover, the rich didn't live just in the city. They had multiple properties: rural villas in Campania, summer residences in Lazio, and even land in conquered provinces. These lands were worked by slaves and tenants, producing wine, wheat, olive oil, and livestock. Not just for personal consumption, but for trade and influence. In the Roman world, owning land meant having power. But not just because of what it produced, but because no one else could step on it without your permission. And beyond the visual luxury, the real privilege was this: space. Space to sleep without noise. To eat without haste. To think without interruptions. Because in a crowded, dirty, noisy, and dangerous Rome, silence was also wealth. In ancient Rome, dinner wasn't just a necessity, it was a work of art. And like any artwork, it had a stage, an audience, and a purpose: to demonstrate power without saying a single word. Roman banquets were not simple meals. They were carefully orchestrated ceremonies. They began at dusk and could stretch deep into the night. Everything started with the arrangement of the triclinium, the hall where guests reclined on silver or carved wooden couches. The guests were seated according to their social rank, and each position had a meaning. Sitting next to the host was a political statement. Slaves, trained to move silently, served spiced wine, perfumed water to wash hands, and appetizers like raw oysters, stuffed eggs, and honey bread. Then came the spectacle, the mensa primi. The main dish. There were no limits. Whole animals stuffed with other animals were served: a wild boar with birds inside, a fish cooked with small snakes. Everything had to provoke awe. The ingredients were brought from the furthest corners of the empire: garum from Hispania, dates from Africa, lobsters from Sicily, truffles from northern Italy. But the goal wasn't taste. It was astonishment. Some hosts had gold coins placed under the dishes, as a surprise gift. Others asked their cooks to serve food inside ice sculptures that would melt during dinner. Drinks were served in Phoenician glass cups or solid gold goblets. Occasionally, guests washed their hands with wine. Yes, pure wine, not for hygiene, but for excess. Dessert, or mensa secunda, was no less impressive: fruits soaked in honey, sweets with rose petals, ice cream brought with snow from the Alps. And while all this happened, poets recited verses, musicians played harps or flutes, and comedians made the guests laugh. Entertainment was part of the menu. There were even rules: eating too quickly was considered vulgar. Returning the plate without touching it could be an offense. And vomiting was, believe it or not, an accepted custom to continue eating. Because the goal wasn't just to eat. It was to endure. Endure the excess, the abundance, the opulence. At banquets, they measured who could take more. Not in strength, but in stomach. And above all, how far a man was willing to go, to make it clear that he was above everyone. In Rome, dressing wasn't a matter of style. It was a political statement. Your clothes, your jewelry, even your hairstyle, spoke for you before you opened your mouth. They were your business card, your social ID, and your symbolic armor. The tunics of the rich were made of fine linen or silk brought from China. But what truly made the difference was the color. The Tyrian purple, a dye extracted from mollusks through a slow and expensive process, was reserved exclusively for the most powerful. Only emperors or some senators could wear it fully. A purple trim on the toga already implied that you were close to power. But it wasn't just about clothes. The whole body was decorated. Aristocratic women wore hairstyles so complex that they required hours to make and expert hands that knew how to braid, inflate, and support hair structures that looked like real living crowns. Some wore wigs imported from North Africa, others applied aromatic oils that cost more than a house. Women's hairstyles didn't just change with fashion. They changed with politics. If an empress imposed a new style, the entire elite copied it. It was a way to align oneself with the figure of the greatest power. For men, the beard or its absence was also a symbol. Emperor Hadrian imposed the fashion of the full beard, which had previously been considered unkempt, and with that, he transformed the male ideal for decades. Jewels, meanwhile, were ubiquitous. Rings on every finger, pearl necklaces, solid gold bracelets. Some Roman women wore necklaces so heavy they needed help to walk. A ring wasn't just an ornament. It was a tool. With it, letters, contracts, and decrees were sealed. It was a personal signature in miniature, and the richest had several, each serving a different function. There were even jewels for animals. Cats with collars, falcons with silver bells, and, according to Pliny the Elder, a woman so wealthy that she gifted an emerald bracelet to an eel. These gestures, known as munera, were visible, memorable, and expensive. But they were worth every sestertius. Because they not only elevated the status of the benefactor, but also guaranteed them influence, respect, and often, immunity. Some wealthy individuals donated thousands of denarii in bread, wine, or oil for the people. Not out of compassion, but because they knew that the support of the plebs could sway political decisions. In the inscriptions that have come down to us, phrases like these can be read. X paid for the restoration of this aqueduct for the greater glory of his family. Y offered this fountain to the people, and was elected as aedile the following year. Even death was an opportunity to give. Many left specific instructions in their wills: distribute money to the poor, free slaves, fund public spectacles. Not out of remorse, but to preserve their family name. Because in a society obsessed with posterity, every act of charity was also an act of symbolic self-preservation. And although some gestures did come from a genuine desire to serve, like those of Pliny the Younger, who helped fund the education of orphans, most of the time, charity was a calculation. In Rome, giving wasn't losing. It was investing. Because when you have everything, the only legacy left to build is how you will be remembered. 2,000 years later, Rome is still alive. Not in its statues, not in its ruins, but in our customs. Today we don't need purple tunics or slaves perfuming our hands. Now we wear luxury watches, designer clothes, private jets, and mansions on hills with sea views. But the principle is the same: to demonstrate without words who holds control. Social media is the new triclinium. We post what we eat, where we travel, how we dress, not to share, but to stand out. To show that we live better. That we are, in some way, superior. And although we no longer engrave our faces on coins, we print our image in campaigns, brands, virtual bills, NFTs, founder plaques, inflated biographies. Banquets are now exclusive parties. Roman villas, armored penthouses. Public donations, media-covered philanthropic campaigns. Even free time remains a symbol of elite status. Today, as yesterday, those who cannot work and still earn money are seen as successful. So, what has changed, then? Only the packaging. Because we still believe that value is in what's visible. That wealth, power, and status must be shown. That if no one sees it, it doesn't count. In that mirror, Rome wasn't just a civilization. It was a manual. One that, without realizing it, we continue to read every day. Stop for a moment. If you had been born in ancient Rome, where do you imagine yourself? Waking up between linen sheets, surrounded by sculptures and private gardens. Or walking barefoot on stone streets, carrying water for another, with no right to speak or decide. Because the truth is, in Rome, as in any society, the wealth of some was possible thanks to the poverty of others. And although its monuments have fallen, its ideas about power, hierarchy, and prestige still stand. So, the question is inevitable. Have we really evolved? Or have we just changed the masks? If this journey to the heart of wealthy Rome left you thinking, tell me in the comments. What part surprised you the most? At what point did you feel the history was too similar to the present? And if you know someone who still believes that ostentation is just a thing of modern influencers, share this video with them. Because understanding Rome is also understanding ourselves. See you in the next episode. And remember, a people that doesn't know its history is condemned to repeat it.